Hi there, I'm Dr. Victoria Mattingly, and this is Better Humans at Work. On this week's episode, I'm joined by Megan Sandwick. Megan is founder of Strategic Productivity Partner LLC, a management consulting firm creating personalized productivity processes so entrepreneurs can get more done daily by working smarter and not necessarily harder. Megan works with entrepreneurs, consultants, business owners to move from being stressed and overwhelmed to taking control of your productivity, resulting in increased earnings. On this week's episode, Megan and I discuss her job as a strategic productivity partner and guidelines for establishing productive habits that work for everyone. I hope you get some tips to increase productivity in your life, which will reduce stress and make us all feel like better humans as a result. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Megan. How are you?
I'm so good, Dr. Victoria. How are you?
I'm so good as well. It's so good to see you. I'm so grateful for the innovative technologies and ways of connecting with people that came as like one of the silver linings of COVID, right? Megan and I met on this app called Lunch Club, and she's all the way out in San Diego. I'm out here in Pittsburgh, but we just like hit it off, and I'm fascinated by the work that she does. And I'm just so thrilled to bring you into our audience, Megan, and just share what you do to help improve the human experience at work. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to join you because it's such an important thing to talk about. And you're right, being able to pick brains from and be connected with so many people, like you said, that has been the hidden blessing of this past year in the pandemic.
It really has, and that map behind you is so perfect because it's really like lifted geographical barriers that were in place before. And like most of my partners and collaborators and clients are not here in Pittsburgh. And so I'm just grateful to have you in my fold, even though we're 3 time zones away. But I'm so excited to share what you do with the world because I am an organizational psychologist. And I know you've talked about the work that you do with organizing and organization things, but it's a completely different way. And so can you just share with our audience, like what exactly is a strategic productivity partner and how does this help improve the human experience at work?
When you think about productivity and getting things done, there are so many ways things can happen. And so I've always been involved in productivity. When I started, my professional career in the 90s, I loved the thought of how can you take control of your time and how can you get more done? Because one thing we know is that one commodity that we all have that's the same no matter what is time. Doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what you do, we all have 24 hours in a day. You can't change that. There's no Botox to add more time or anything like that. And so what I started to realize is that we are not professionals and we just don't know how to organize our time. It's not something we're necessarily always taught. And we change and our needs change. And so what I identified is if I could help people with one thing, if I could help people with their productivity, that would be where I could make a difference. And it makes a huge difference for my clients. So as a strategic productivity partner, that's what I've been doing is realizing like, okay, I can help here. Like we can't solve everything, but I can do this. And so that's what I do. So when I start working with my clients, so for example, I have a new client I started working with a couple of weeks ago, and he called me and he was like, Megan, I need help, like my life, everything. Like he was in this place of chaos. He's like, I have so many projects and meetings, and I don't know what to do. And I just, and he was feeling that. And I could hear and I could feel like he's stressed, like he's not able to get done what he wants because all of his mind is thinking not about what's in front of him, but all of the other stuff.
Yeah.
And so what I do as a strategic productivity partner is we met and I was like, okay, so tell me everything about right now that you don't like. Tell me all the feelings, the thoughts, the things that are, and we just brainstorm for a few minutes because I find some of those words to be very powerful later, especially if we think about, I don't like this feeling. So then when we feel that feeling again, we can be like, wait a minute, I know I don't like this feeling. So what I do is with clients is look at, okay, so this is where you are. Where do you want to be with your productivity? What is that dream scenario? What is it that you want? And then we know that from where we are to where we want to be, there's a whole journey that goes in there. It's not a straight line, life isn't a straight line as we've all learned. And so when you think about it with productivity, there's all these things that get in the way right there, whether it's expectations that we place on ourselves, whether it's attachments to thoughts of, I should be able to work 11 days and get through everything. And I think over the last year, we've all learned that we shouldn't work 11 hours every day,
Correct.
but we also have learned that we can't just do that, that our bodies that's not the
Yeah,
best way
we're
in the world.
human beings. We're human beings that need to sleep and rest and eat and fill our soul with things that aren't just work all the time. And now that we've brought work into our homes, it's only fair that we are able to have boundaries and have things in place to allow ourselves to be human at work, right? And so, oh, I love it. And something else that you said that resonated so much with me was, I wanted to be I always thought I'd be like a counseling or a therapist, a clinical psychologist, right? And I realized pretty early on in my undergrad degree, like, okay, I don't think I could like leave work at home if I'm working with people with these like deep problems and they need like so much help. And like realizing that the system is in a place where the people who need the most help are the ones least likely to be able to have access to it. And like, this is a messed up system. I think everyone should have a therapist, for the record, but I just couldn't be one. I realized that early on. And then I found organizational psychology and I was like, okay, so I'm not going to be able to like help like people get through their depression or schizophrenia or whatever, but if I can make work just a little better, and we spend so many of our waking hours in the workplace, if I can make that just a little better for everyone, like I'm okay with having this type of impact if I can't have like the deep individual level impact. And so what you said about like how you help people do work better and reduce that stress and get some like life, like I very transparently, I am one of Megan's clients. I found out what she did and I was like, I need this because my calendar looks like a Tetris game that I'm perpetually losing, right? And I don't give myself the space to do work. And I was trained as an organizational psychologist, and we know how to use data to hire people and train people and really the science of people at work, but we don't learn how to do our work well. And how are we missing such a key component of the work experience, of the employee experience, if we're not helping people figure out how to do their work? So I think being a strategic productivity partner is so valuable. And I just wanted to share what you did with the world. Okay. So can we talk a little bit about how strategic productivity relates to like outcomes like worker well-being, or what I like to call work-life stabilization? Because I think work-life balance is a myth, but how does strategic productivity relate to these other like worker well-being outcomes? Yeah.
100%. And I agree with you. Work-life balance, there is no balance, right? It's all, and it's kind of like you said with Tetris, that's a really good way to look at it, is that we have a board of our life and it's putting all of the pieces in place when they need to be in place. And so one of the things that I've found to help with, just that concept of work, life and how it happens is to be honest and just say, okay, let's look at everything that you need to do. One of the issues that we have, and especially when we work in brick and mortar buildings and when I was in the corporate world, in that situation, when we separate out our lives, right, we have our work life and this is what we do, and we have our personal life and this is what we do. And that worked. There was an age in our era that in our world that worked, but in 2021, that isn't the case anymore. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I find, and I love working with people individually to say, what works for you? I think we need to think in an organizational level. We need to set expectations, and we need to set boundaries, and we need to set kind of some guidelines, some swim. I was working with a client this morning. We were like, okay, everyone needs to be in their own swim lane, right? We need to set some swim lanes so that everyone's doing what they need to do. And so when we're talking about work, that needs to happen in a couple ways. One way that needs to happen is we need to allow people to do what they need to do in their time and space.
Yes. Oh, so just a quick example, and I'm
totally true. No, isn't it? When you think about it, it sounds so true, but then when you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't been doing that, right?
Like I'm taking care of my father right now, and he just had a broken hip and hip surgery, and I'm helping him navigate, this very complex system, and all these places are only open during work hours. They're only open during work hours. And I'm a CEO of a quickly growing company, and so finding that time, but having the control and the ability to say, I am blocking out 2 to 4. That means I'll be working, 7 to 11 tonight or whatever. But like, I have that control, and I can still get what I need done during the day, and also get it done at night because I have that control. But so many people don't. They don't have that flexibility, and it's just awful. But yeah, I just wanted to share the quick example to kind of
it's so true. No, that's so true, because when you think about it, this is how, when we think not only of ourselves, but this question is, especially if we work with anybody else, if we're leaders in a company like you're a CEO, and if we have family members, if we're connected with anybody else, we actually need to be aware of how our time impacts everybody. And we also need to be realistic that, again, it doesn't work to say, okay, I'm only going to work from 8 to 5 and then the rest of my life, because like you said, there's always going to be that time they're not open. How do you do that? And that's also where we need to, and this gets into equality, right?
Yes.
We need to respect people's entire lives and everything that's going on. Because when we think about moms or single, I think this last year with the pandemic, we've absolutely seen how women have been just impacted, because when you think about it, and that's where we need to allow people to work as they work. I always wondered, and I remember when I started working, I was like, who decided on 8 to 5? Why 8 to 5? Like 8 is just annoying. But even more important than that, and that was myself in my 20s, just, not liking mornings. But now, as I'm not in my 20s and I'm older, I'm realizing that's a limitation, because there could be, like, I'm not a morning person. I can have client calls in the morning, but if I need to think and be creative. So that's where I think, again, when we're thinking about what the pandemic has done and where we need to look moving forward, is to allow people's entire lives to be taken into consideration and to trust people. If we have adults who are working at home, who are also a principal, who also are, taking care of everything, we need to allow that space. Because if we give people that space, and then we say, okay, now here's your space to work in the tools, think of what they're going to accomplish.
Yes. And like a strategy that I did some, when I used to teach at university, I would do some guest lectures on time management. Like, what does research show about time management? And a pointer that I always give is figure out when your flow time is, or when your creative time is. When is the time? And if there were students, when can you write papers, right? And then build your calendar around that. Give yourself block those 4 hours, block that chunk of time, and build everything else around that, knowing that you need to capitalize on when your brain is going to be able to give the right level of output. Like I always say to people on my team, like, my brain stops at 6 o'clock. Like, you can get I can do email stuff and design, but like heavy thinking, can't do it after 6. And so I'm a morning person, and that works for me. I used to be a bartender, and I didn't take classes before noon, and didn't have my shift start till 4 p.m. And so we just need to, I think that call out is just really, really smart. But yes, worker well-being, work-life stabilization. So how do we use strategic productivity to get to that? Just place of stabilization.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think part of it as leaders, when we're thinking about work life for the companies, organizations, cohorts that we're in, I think what we need to do is we need to look at a holistic approach. And when I'm saying holistic, I'm saying WHOLE. We need to look at the whole picture of the organization, right? We need to look at the whole picture and the people within it, because we also need to respect that just because things work for me in one way doesn't always mean that they're going to work for somebody else, because my learning style is my learning style, and it's based on how I grew up. It's based on my family and my surroundings, and the choices that I've made as an adult to change my learning styles as I've needed to. But I can't assume that just because I do something one way, that my team members do something another way. So I think as leaders, it's important for us to be honest with, sometimes there are tasks when it's like, we just need to get this done, do this way. Understandable. We all have those tasks, and there's some things like answering the phone. You always do, we get that. But I think we need to take a step back and look at the whole picture. And again, this is where we need to look at whole picture, at the whole picture of people, because we need to also honor and respect what their preferences and priorities are and what their learning styles are. Because I know I learned when I was working in social services as a deputy director and as a manager, when I would say, okay, this is how I do it, now you figure out how it works for you. If I gave that next line of permission, like, okay, this works for me, and this is how I've done it, or whomever, like they saw. But then if we say, okay, now let's make it personal for you. Yeah. And when we do that, we as leaders can't have judgment, right? Yeah. We can't have judgment that if someone says, I don't like red on a screen, that we need to honor that. You know what I'm saying? Unless it has to be. But if someone's like, you know what, in our interactions, I just don't like red. That, because what we're realizing is when it comes to productivity, it's about getting stuff done, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we get stuff done? It's that resistance. There's a space of resistance. And so if it's kind of one of those things that if there's something that we don't like, or if we stick in resistance, we're not moving to productivity. And so it's just being respectful of ourselves and others, and not being attached to any principles, and not being attached to this is how everyone has to do it.
Yes. So what you're talking about, Megan, it is inclusion. Like and this is why like I do a lot of work with inclusion, helping leaders especially be more inclusive as leaders. And inclusion just means the behaviors that you do to make others feel valued, respected, seen, and heard, right? And recognizing this is your situation, you need more flexibility, you have kids, you have aging parents, whatever your situation is, and giving that flexibility and that permission to do it the way you want to do it. But I see you, I understand you, I respect you, but I trust that you'll get the work done too, because it's a two-way street as well, right? Like we still need to, it can't just be like, okay, and then maybe do some work next Tuesday, we still have to get our work done, but we can build things in place. And I feel like taking that extra energy and effort to find out what are the unique needs of each of the individuals on your team and how can you best meet those needs, but still create the system and the boundaries to allow us to work efficiently together. So I love it so much.
It's so important and powerful. I mean, when you think about it, that's how you get the best from people, because every person brings something unique, completely powerful, and these experiences. And I think if we've learned anything over, when you think about, all of the tech inventions and everything, it's because people had that space and we're like, hey, there needs to be something like Zoom. And so, so I think if we, in this period of time where there's so much ability for innovation, and when you think about it, again, thinking back to the 90s when I entered the work world, like we had typewriters still, when you think of all of the things that have changed, and when you think about all of that technology, we've kind of had to learn a lot on our own.
Yeah.
And so we need to respect how people have been learning things and see what they'll bring to the table, because they're going to make it better. It's one of those things where inclusion, the best thing for me about inclusion is it means I stop working alone, because my way isn't the only best way, but let me bring things from everybody, and then it makes it better.
Yeah. Well, that is really one of the biggest benefits of diversity. And sometimes like the whole diversity, equity, inclusion message gets lost or usurped by the diversity of thought, right? Because we have a diversity of thought, but we're a whole table of white women sitting around the table. It's just like, so true diversity, bringing in different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences and like just different people, you get so many more tools to pick from. Like I remember when I became a new mom, I learned so much about mothering by seeing how people in other countries did motherhood, like the baby wearing, right? And like figuring out like little things I never would have thought about. And like a baby wearing, that was my favorite thing. I had we went around town, I had a little backpack. It was the cutest thing ever. And I never even would have thought of that if I didn't have different examples of motherhood that I could draw from. And to be able to bring all these different people together who are maximizing their time and creating that space too. Because I know for myself, I do a lot of creative work and I never give myself enough time to do it. And there was one day I had to get this one pager, like marketing page thing done. And I'm really good at being an organizational psychologist, being a sales and marketing person. Like I've had to learn that for the last 2 years, And so I remember I started getting into it. It just took a while and I had already half my time was gone. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to get this finished in an hour. And I did something that was so liberating. I just cleared the rest of my calendar. Luckily, I didn't have any meetings because I don't bail on meetings, but like I can, I pushed the other projects I had off my plate that day and I gave myself the whole 6 hours. And I made this like beautiful thing that there's no way I could have done in less time, but like I never give myself that time. So you are giving people the gift of time, which is amazing. And also in your work, you've done some really interesting international work as well, and the corporate experience you had at Upwork. And you shared this amazing story with me when we first met, and about gender equity, and I had like an aha about like xenophobia. But would you mind sharing a little bit about the work you did, and especially with the women and the gender equity work that you did in the Philippines?
Sure, definitely. So I worked for 2 years. So I transitioned to the remote world about 7 years ago. And part of that, I worked for 2 years for Upwork. I worked for, I was a freelancer on the campaign and then they are on the platform and then they hired me and I was a project coordinator. And so what I did is I worked with our Fortune 100 and 500 companies to coordinate freelance projects. And so I was kind of the intermediary between our client and then the freelancers. And so it was amazing because, first of all, I learned about amazing projects and things that people are doing. The second thing is we literally had a team from around the world. So the Upwork professionals team was around the world too. So it was great to learn from the professionals team and just to learn about project management, not just from the American perspective, but also from the international perspective and priorities. And then we also, when working with freelancers, it would be interesting because we were working with freelancers from around the world. And I went into it with an American HR perspective, especially living in California. I've hired thousands of people in California. So I was like, I know how to do this. And when I started working with remote freelancers, totally different ballgame as far as how you do it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was interesting, we had a couple of projects. One of the projects that we had was a listing creation project where we had a freelance team of 15 freelancers in the Philippines and 15 freelancers in Pakistan. And we grew it to there were about 50 freelancers in total over time. And so what we did is they would receive listings from a big, a housing rental company. They would receive the listings and then they would update them in the actual listing system to make them go live. And so we had, like I said, we would get thousands and thousands of listings. And so we would sort them out. And so when I started, there was a system in place where there were two men in the Philippines who got all of the assignments and then they passed them out. But they also kept a lot. You know what I'm saying? It was the people who were in it were doing it. And so part of what I came in, what we started doing was, let's look at this assignment process. Let's look how it is. Let's look at what's going on. And so in doing that, one of the things that we realized is we were able to give increased rates for, as we were going along. Because so for me, what I learned is we had a team of people in the Pakistan and a team in the Philippines. And normally you might not, and this is where, again, my American mind was thinking, oh my gosh, here are people from two very different parts of the world. And so part of me was wondering, how does that go working with them?
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, people are people.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you're from. Because here's the thing, and I remember when I got this Sunday, it was a Sunday afternoon, I saw this communication chain and I totally started getting emotional because there was one of our freelancers in Pakistan, his father-in-law had died and his wife also worked. So we knew that, it was the wife and the father, and so he sent out a message saying, I'm not able to work this week because of this. I will tell you within 15 minutes, every person on the team, didn't matter if they were from the Philippines, Pakistan, what can I do? My prayers, my thoughts are with you. I am here for you. At that point, it didn't matter who, you know what I'm saying? Like it just came to, here's someone that I know that's hurting and I am going to send the most precious thing that I have, which is my prayers to you. And to watch that interaction, it was, I know that's a little bit of a difference, but it's one of those things where when people just work together, you realize that we're people. We all put one sock on at a time. We all have email and we go through one email at a time. And so it was really great to be able to experience and see how, if you just let people be and stop putting, and if you're working towards a common goal, right? We were working towards a common goal. We had a process and we had open communication. When this also came into interesting play was when it came time to assign rates. So another thing that's interesting in Pakistan and Philippines and other countries, in America, there's a whole nepotism. Do we work with families? Do we not? That's kind of a gray area. But in other countries, it isn't gray, because in other countries, like in the Philippines, like there's a sense of honor. Like if I brought someone to this project to work on it, it's also reflecting on me. And so I'm going to do a good job because I want so I'm going to help that person.
Yeah.
I'm going to do whatever I can to help that person.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to set them up for success. So that was kind of, I know that's a little bit of an off train, but it was just interesting to watch and see. Again, if you just let people work towards a common goal, and if you, again, go back to what a team is, then that's, and if you let everyone and appreciate and respect everyone. So the other thing that was super interesting that happened is it came to time where we were updating rates, right? So we were able to give raises. And so again, going back to, this is where I had to learn that I also need to respect other people's cultures, and I need to respect other people's values. And so there became an issue that we had husbands and wives working together. And for example, in Pakistan, can the wife, or is it a tradition for the wife to make as much as the husband? And how do you, because the rates were not equal when I started. And so my thought was, I'm going to go in and I'm going to make the rates equal so that the men and the women, equity, right?
That's pay equity. Yeah.
That's what you have to do. And as I started doing that, I was bold and thinking this is what I have to do. I also had to realize that, wait a minute, there's also a structure in place where in Pakistan and, and in the Philippines, whatever country, this happened to be the specific examples. What we need to do is I also need to respect that. So this is where inclusion, right? I had to say, I understand that there is a cultural difference and I need to respect it. And while I want to come in and say, I'm going to give everyone the same rate now, that might not be the best bet. But what I can do is, how close can I get the rate? How can we start? And so it wasn't, so it took me a while. At first I was like, but I'm not doing what I need to do. But then I was like, stop it. We need to look at, yes, we need to get to equality. We also need to make everyone feel comfortable with the process as much as we can, and we need to, and again, that's where honoring and respecting the land and the habits and the traditions of where people work are also important. So the good news is we got the rates really, really close.
So it really went from here to here or something.
It went more to here. There was a little bit of a difference, but it wasn't as much. And
what a beautiful example of both cultural competence. So whenever leaders do inclusive training and trying to be more inclusive leaders, cultural competence is always an element of that, or it should be if it's a good inclusive leadership training, right? And so what a beautiful example of using and having that cultural competence to be able to still understand what is the expectation, what are the norms, and how can we still get closer to equity? How can we still close a gap? And something that I've had to learn in the DEI space is patience and celebration of moving the needle. That's a very common phrase when it comes to DEI work. And I am a proud disruptor and change agent and ready to get stuff done, sometimes too fast, in my own demise. And so the moving the needle and the celebration of incremental progress and not stopping there, right? Always keeping that momentum going, but celebrating the progress and working in the, as you said, with more comfortable with having that cultural competence and awareness. So, oh my goodness, I could talk about cultural competence and work-life stabilization and strategic productivity all day, but we should wrap up. And so I'm sure if you didn't know what strategic productivity was before watching this episode, and I'm sure those listening out there want to know what they could do, who want to use more strategic productivity in their workday to help improve in their lives at work and be better humans at work. What 3 recommendations would you have for our audience, Megan?
Okay, so my 3 recommendations. First is, it's about the habits, right? One of the things you need to realize is that productivity is the one place in the world you get to be completely selfish. It's all about you and what you like. And so, but we need to be intentional with that. Productivity habits don't just happen. The good thing about me being a strategic productivity partner is I get to be strategic and we get to say, okay, here's an hour or a half hour where we're going to talk about it, right? So what I would say for everybody, the first step is remember that it's personal. Remember that you shouldn't judge what you want, but spend time creating habits. So my first action step is to spend 5 minutes, right? Just bullet journal, whatever works for you, but just spend 5 minutes and think about, what are my productivity habits? Kind of like the client I mentioned at the beginning, right? So where are you now? Where do you want to be? And spend some time writing about that. And if there's things that, if you have strong feelings that come up, just write it, right? It doesn't matter. It's there, just get it out. So the first thing you want to do is to be intentional, spend some time and just think about What are the habits? At the end of that writing, go back and identify what are 3 specific things that seem to be a common theme that you're going to work on right now. So you're going to do that. So the first is to be intentional. The second, then once you're going to, so now we know we're going to be intentional. Now we know what you want. So the second thing is commit to spending. Now I'm going to, okay, so I'm going to work with everyone here. Well, I would say daily. Okay. I'm going to agree, or you know what I mean? If you would spend time weekly, whether it's Sunday, Monday or even Friday for the next week, spend at least 30 minutes looking at your calendar, looking at your projects and priorities, and looking at what it is that you want to accomplish this week. If you do that every week, what you're going to begin to see, because you need to do this is where realistic expectations come in. So if I look at my calendar this week and I realize I have 40 hours of meetings, and then I look at my project work and I realize I have 40 hours of project work, that's not going to work. Yeah. So that by, looking at your calendar every week, you're going to start to see that, and it's going to build a habit. So that's the second thing. So 1, be intentional to create habits. 2, spend time weekly with your calendar and your productivity. 6 months totally makes a difference. And then the third one is to do a tools review. So there are so many productivity tools out there, but what I definitely recommend is to take time and write down what it is that you like, all of the tools that you do. Then what you want to do is ask yourself, keep it, toss it, make it better. Because if your tools aren't working, you're going to be off track. Once your tools go off track, then you're off track. So those are my 3 recommendations. 1, to be intentional to create habits. 2, to spend time weekly, and 3, to do a tools review.
So helpful. So actionable. I always say, like, whether I speak or do a training or whatever, like, if you don't actually change your behavior as a result, like, what are we doing here? So, like, I hope that y'all take some of Megan's tips, put them into action, help, give yourself that time and that gift of space and the ability to not do work in a stressful manner, right? And so, Megan, how can people get in touch? How do you recommend, what's your final call to action before we wrap up today?
Okay, so my call to action. So you can get in touch with me. Feel free, you can email me, or you can go to my website. My website is downwithspp.com. And you can email me at megan@downwithspp.com. If you ever have questions or anything like that, please feel free. The most important action, this isn't a sales and it's not about me. What this is about is being strategic and finding a productivity partner for your time. So we talked about that space from where you are to where you want to go. And so when you look at that again, we know that that's a complex roller coaster to get there. So you need to be intentional with your productivity, and you need to be aware that it's a roller coaster and how you're going to do it. So find strategic productivity help for yourself, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else, whether there's somebody that you have that you an accountability partner or a master group, but just find and be intentional to be strategic with your productivity. And if each of you does that, I will be so happy, because then you'll be working smarter, not harder, and you'll take control of your time.
Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your pointers. And thank you most of all for helping us be better humans at work.